Picture this. It's a Tuesday afternoon. You're sitting at your desk, eating the same sad lunch you've eaten for the past 6 months, probably a sad little salad or a reheated something, and you open your banking app. Not because you want to. You open it because you have to. Because rent's coming up, or your car needs something, or you just need to know, and there it is. Your savings account. $20,000. And instead of feeling amazing, instead of the confetti and the celebration you imagined when you set that goal 18 months ago, you feel nothing. Maybe a little relieved. Maybe a little suspicious. Like, okay, now what? What is this actually going to do for me? Here's what nobody told you. That feeling of, now what? That's actually your brain doing you a favor. Because $20,000 isn't just a savings milestone. It is a financial inflection point. And most people blow right past it without understanding what has structurally changed in their financial life. Today, we're going to fix that. My name is Nick, and I have spent the better part of the last decade obsessing over the math behind wealth building, not the theoretical kind they teach in a college classroom, but the real, practical, sometimes uncomfortable math that explains why some people seem to build wealth almost effortlessly while others feel like they're running on a treadmill set just slightly too fast to ever get ahead. And look, I want to be upfront with you. I'm not here to hype you up. I'm not going to tell you that $20,000 means you're rich, or that you've cracked a code, or that it's smooth sailing from here. That would be dishonest, and honestly, it would be a waste of your time. What I am going to tell you is this. $20,000 is the first number in your financial life where the math actually starts working for you, instead of against you. And this is the part that nobody explains. It only works if you understand what changed and why. Because if you treat $20,000 like it's just a bigger version of $5,000, you're going to miss the entire point. In this video, we're going to walk through exactly what happens mathematically, psychologically, and strategically when you cross the $20,000 threshold. We're going to look at what your emergency fund actually buys you that isn't money. We're going to break down how compounding starts to behave differently at this level. We're going to talk about something I call the opportunity cost flip, the moment your money becomes more valuable than your time. And we're going to get into the behavioral traps that cause people to squander this exact inflection point and end up right back where they started. This is going to be data heavy. It's going to be honest. And yeah, the math is going to be a little brutal in places. But that's kind of the point. If you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I put out videos every week on real wealth building for real people, not the cut your avocado toast crowd, but people actually doing the work. All right, let's get into it. Let's start with something that's going to sound a little counterintuitive. The most valuable thing $20,000 gives you has nothing to do with the $20,000 itself. I know. Bear with me. There's a study from the Urban Institute, and I want you to actually sit with this number that found families with as little as $1,000 in liquid savings are significantly less likely to experience hardship after a financial disruption than families with zero savings. Not $20,000, $2,000. The psychological and practical protection from savings kicks in way earlier than most people think. But here's where $20,000 specifically becomes a different animal. A $20,000. Assuming you're a relatively normal person with relatively normal expenses, let's say you're spending somewhere between $3,500 and $5,000 a month, you now have between 4 and 6 months of living expenses sitting in savings. That's the standard emergency fund recommendation, right? 3 to 6 months. You've hit it. Congratulations. But here's what that number actually means in the real world, and why I think the financial media dramatically undersells it. I call this the toxic job shield. Think about what 4 to 6 months of expenses actually does for your life. It means that right now, today, if your boss walked in and said something to you that crossed a line, something disrespectful, something unethical, something that made you feel like your dignity wasn't worth the paycheck, you could leave. Not in theory. Not someday when I have enough saved. Right now. You could say no. You could walk out. You could take the time to find something better instead of desperately grabbing the first offer that comes along. Because your rent is due in 11 days. That is not a financial asset. That is a life asset. And here's the thing about the toxic job shield that makes it mathematically significant, not just emotionally. Research from the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances has consistently shown that people with adequate liquid savings, that 3 to 6 month buffer, are more likely to negotiate salary more likely to take strategic career risks, and more likely to leave underperforming jobs. The result? Higher lifetime earnings. Not by a little. We're talking meaningfully higher, sometimes six figures over a decade. So the $20,000 isn't just sitting there doing nothing while you sleep. It is actively generating value in the form of negotiating leverage, career mobility, and psychological safety, none of which shows up in your interest rate. Now, I wanted to make sure we're being precise here, because this is important. I'm talking about $20,000 in liquid savings, not in a 401k that you'd pay a penalty to access, not in a brokerage account that could drop 30% in a bad month. Liquid, accessible, high-yield savings account, money market. Something boring and safe and there when you need it. If your $20,000 is split, say $12,000 liquid and $8,000 invested, that's a different conversation. And honestly, it might be the right move depending on your situation. But for right now, I want you to understand the value of the full liquid buffer before we start talking about what to do with the money beyond that. Here's a metaphor I keep coming back to. Imagine you're playing a video game, and for the first several levels, every time you die, you start completely over. No checkpoint, no saved progress, just back to the beginning. That's what financial life looks like without an emergency fund. Every setback sends you back to zero. $20,000 is your first checkpoint save. You don't win the game at the checkpoint, but you stop losing all your progress. Every time something goes wrong, that is worth more than most people ever stop to calculate. And speaking of calculating, now that we understand what the $20,000 is protecting, let's talk about what it's producing, because this is where the math starts to get genuinely interesting. Okay, now we're getting into the part that I genuinely get excited about. And I want to walk through this math slowly, because if you rush it, you miss the whole point. Everyone has heard of compound interest. It's the eighth wonder of the world. Einstein allegedly said it. It's on every personal finance poster ever made. I get it. You've heard it. But here's what I don't think gets explained clearly enough. Compounding isn't linear. It has acceleration points. And $20,000 is one of them. Let me show you what I mean with a direct comparison. Let's take two people. Person A and Person B. Both are 30 years old. Both invest in a simple index fund averaging 8% annual returns, which is conservative and historically reasonable for a broad market index fund over long periods. The only difference is their starting point. Person A starts with $5,000. Person B starts with $20,000. Neither of them adds another dollar after today. We're just watching what the starting balance does on its own. At age 40, 10 years in. Person A has approximately $10,795. Person B has approximately $43,178. So person B has 4 times as much money, which makes sense because they started with 4 times as much. Still linear, still proportional. Okay, at age 50, 20 years in. Person A has approximately $23,305. Person B has approximately $93 to 19. At age 60, 30 years in. Person A has approximately $50,313. Person B has approximately $201 to 53. Now here's where it gets interesting. Let's look at what the money itself earned separate from the original investment. Person A started with $5,000. At 60, they have $50,313. So their money earned $45,313 in growth. Person B started with $20,000. At 60, they have $201,253. So their money earned $181,253 in growth. Starting investment difference was $15,000. The outcome difference was over $150,000. The ratio expanded. That's not linear. That is compounding doing what compounding actually does when it has enough principal to work with. I call this the quiet multiplier. And it's why every dollar you put into your investing base in your 20s and 30 seconds is worth dramatically more than a dollar you put in during your 40s or 50 seconds, not just a little more, a lot more. The math is almost offensive when you look at it clearly, but here's the part that actually matters for right now for you. Watching this video, thinking about your 20,000, most people hit $20,000 and do one of two things. Either they leave it all in savings and feel responsible, or they dump it all into the market and feel investor-brained. Both of these, done blindly, miss the actual strategy. Here's what the math suggests. Instead, if your emergency fund is fully covered, let's Say you need $15,000 to cover 4 or 5 months of expenses, then you have approximately $5,000 of that. $20,000, that is investable surplus. And that $5,000 invested at 30 years old at 8% becomes roughly $50,313 by the time you're 60. That's a tenfold increase on money you might otherwise have left sitting in a savings account earning 4%, where that same $5,000 would grow to around $16,000 over 30 years. The difference is $34,000 in outcome from one decision. And I want to be really clear here that math only works if your emergency fund is truly covered. Because if you drain your liquid reserves to invest, and then a $4,000 car repair hits you in February, you're pulling that money back out of the market, probably at a loss, and you've defeated the entire purpose. The sequence matters. Think about it like a foundation. You wouldn't build the second floor of a house before the first floor is structurally sound. $20,000 when properly allocated is your first floor. And once it's solid, every dollar above it can start building upward. Now, I want to add one more layer to this section, because I think it's something most finance content skips entirely. There's a concept in behavioral economics called present bias, the tendency to overvalue things happening right now compared to things happening in the future. And it is the single biggest enemy of the quiet multiplier. Here's what present bias looks like in practice. You hit $20,000. You feel good. And then your brain starts whispering. You know what would feel really good right now? A vacation. A new car. Maybe finally getting that furniture that doesn't look like a college apartment. And the thing is, you're not wrong that those things would feel good. Present bias isn't irrational. It's just expensive. A $5,000 vacation at 30 doesn't cost you $5,000. It costs you the $50,000 that $5,000 would have become by 60. That's the real price tag. And nobody puts that on the resort website. I'm not saying don't live your life. I'm saying understand what you're actually buying when you spend investable surplus. Because once you see the real price tags, your decisions start to look very different. All right. So now, you understand what $20,000 protects and what it produces. Let's talk about the thing that honestly took me years to fully appreciate. And it might be the most counterintuitive shift that happens at this milestone. Here's a question I want you to really sit with. What is an hour of your time worth? If you're making $60,000 a year and working roughly 2,000 hours, that's $30 per hour. If you're at $90,000, you're around $45 per hour. If you're pushing $120,000, you're at $60 per hour. These are rough numbers, but they give us something to work with. Now here's the question that actually matters. What is an hour of your money's time worth? This sounds abstract, but stick with me because this is the mindset shift that separates people who build wealth from people who perpetually feel behind. If you have $20,000 invested at 8% annual returns, that money is earning on average about $1,600 per year. Divide that by 8,760 hours in a year, and your money is earning roughly 18 cents per hour. That sounds tiny, right? Almost laughable. But here's the thing. You earn money for roughly 2,000 hours per year. Your money earns money for all 8,760 hours, including the hours you're sleeping, including weekends, including the 2 weeks you took off in August. It never calls in sick. It doesn't need health insurance. It doesn't get burned out or resentful or start passive-aggressively missing deadlines. And now watch what happens as the balance grows. At $50,000 invested at 8%. You're earning roughly $4,000 per year, or about 46 cents per hour every hour of the year. At $100,000, you're earning $8,000 per year. That's about 91 cents per hour, around the clock. At $250,000, which is actually the milestone I think is the real game changer. But that's a different video. You're earning $20,000 per year passively, which means your money is now earning more than the median American worker earns per year from their labor. That's the flip. That's the moment where, mathematically, your capital starts to pull more weight than your physical time. I call this the opportunity cost flip. And $20,000 is not where the flip happens. I want to be honest about that. The flip happens much later. But $20,000 is where you can first see the flip on the horizon. It's the first time the math becomes visible, and that visibility matters psychologically more than almost anything else in personal finance. Here's why. There's a well-documented phenomenon in behavioral economics called the wealth Threshold affect the idea that people's financial behaviors change meaningfully once they perceive themselves as having enough of a base to build from. In plain English, once people can see that their money is working, they tend to make better decisions about money. They're less impulsive. They're more patient. They're more strategic. 20. is often that first threshold. It's enough to see the compounding in your quarterly statements. It's enough to feel like the game is real. And that feeling that the game is real and that you're actually in it changes how you play. Now I want to give you a concrete example of what the opportunity cost flip looks like in real decision making. Imagine someone, let's call her Jordan. Jordan is 32, earns $78,000 a year, has $20,000 saved and invested. Jordan is thinking about taking a second job, some weekend consulting work to earn an extra $800 a month. Seems smart, right? Hustle culture would say absolutely. Grind it out. But let's look at the full picture. That $800 a month represents roughly 26 extra hours of work per month, assuming she's billing at around $30 per hour after taxes. That's 26 hours of her weekend. 26 hours she's not resting, not building relationships, not pursuing things that might have higher long-term value. Now her $20,000 invested at 8% is generating roughly $133 per month on its own. That's not nothing. That's not $800. But here's the question worth asking. Is the marginal value of that extra $800 worth 26 hours of Jordan's finite weekend time at this stage of her life? Or would she be better served using some of that time to develop a skill, pursue a promotion, or frankly, recover properly so she performs better at her main job? There's no universal answer. But the point is, and this is the point, Jordan is now in a position to ask that question. Before $20,000, the question didn't exist. You just needed the money. Now, Jordan has enough base that the question of time versus money becomes real and nuanced. That's the opportunity cost flip beginning to appear on the horizon. And one more thing before we move on, because I think this is important. The opportunity cost flip has a dark side, and it's called lifestyle inflation. Here's what happens to a lot of people when they hit $20,000 for the first time. They feel the financial relief, the toxic job shield kicks in. They feel more secure. Their anxiety goes down, and then, almost unconsciously, their spending goes up. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just a slightly nicer apartment. A car payment that's a little more than they'd usually consider. A few more dinners out because I've been working hard and I deserve it. And none of those individual decisions is catastrophic. But the cumulative effect is that their savings rate, the engine that got them to $20,000 in the first place, quietly drops. And they stall out. They hit $20,000 and then they hover for months, sometimes years. The milestone that was supposed to be an inflection point becomes a ceiling. I've talked to so many people in this exact situation, and it is genuinely heartbreaking because they did the hard part. They got to $20,000 and then they let off the gas at exactly the wrong moment. Here's the rule I give you. The month you hit $20,000, immediately raise your automatic savings contribution by whatever you can, even if it's just $50 or $100 more per month. Don't give yourself time to lifestyle inflate into the new comfort zone. Use the momentum. Keep the engine running, because the next milestone, the one where compounding really starts to become visible on a monthly basis, is $50,000. And the distance between $20,000 and $50,000 is covered faster than you think if you don't tap the brakes. All right, let's talk about something that I think is the most misunderstood mathematical relationship in personal finance, and that is the relationship between savings and debt. Because here's what most people do when they hit $20,000 in savings while carrying debt. They feel vaguely guilty about it, like they're doing something wrong by having money in a savings account while a credit card or a student loan or a car payment is sitting there with an interest rate attached to it. And so they either do one of two things: they drain the savings to pay off the debt and feel clean, or they keep both running and feel anxious about it. Here's the actual math. And I want you to pay close attention here, because this is the part that changes decisions. Let's say you have $20,000 in savings earning 4.5% in a high-yield savings account, which is a realistic rate as of recent years. And you also have $8,000 in credit card debt at 20% interest. The mathematically obvious answer is pay off the credit card. The 22% interest you're paying is destroying any 4.5% gain you're making on savings. That math is not complicated. If you're carrying high interest consumer debt, anything above 8 or 9%, and you have savings beyond your emergency fund, paying down that debt is almost always the better mathematical move. But here's the nuance that matters: it depends entirely on what kind of debt and what your liquid buffer looks like. I call this the debt calculus, and it has 3 zones. Zone 1 is high interest consumer debt. Credit cards, payday loans, buy now pay later balances, anything above 8%. This debt is a mathematical emergency. If you have savings beyond your 3 to 6 month emergency fund and you're carrying Zone 1 debt, the math is almost always clear. Eliminate the high interest debt first, because no guaranteed investment returns 22. Zone 2 is mid-range debt. Car loans typically in the 6-9 range, some personal loans, older student loans. Here the math gets genuinely complicated. A car loan at 7% versus index fund returns averaging 8% is almost a wash. And when you factor in the psychological value of being debt-free, reasonable people make different decisions. This is a personal call, and I won't pretend there's one right answer. Zone 3 is low interest debt. Federal student loans under 5%. Mortgages in the 3-4 range if you're lucky enough to have locked one in. Here, the math almost universally favors investing over aggressively paying down debt, because your expected investment returns meaningfully exceed your borrowing cost. This is what finance people call positive leverage, and it's one of the few cases where debt can actually accelerate wealth building. Now here's what $20,000 in savings specifically changes about this equation. Before you had $20,000, any decision to aggressively pay down debt came with real risk. Pay off $6,000 of credit card debt, and then your transmission goes out. You're putting the repair on the credit card, and you're right back where you started, possibly with a higher balance. This is the debt payoff trap that wrecks so many people's momentum with $20,000 specifically. With a solid 4 to 5 month emergency buffer established, you now have the security to aggressively attack Zone 1 debt without the risk of immediately reaccumulating it. You're not paying off debt from a position of desperation. You're paying it off from a position of stability. And that distinction is not just psychological. It changes the actual mathematical outcome, because you're not going to have to borrow the money back next month. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine someone, let's call him Marcus. Marcus is 34, earns $68,000 a year, and has just hit $20,000 in savings. He also has $11,000 in credit card debt at 19.99% interest. His minimum payments are around $220 per month. At minimum payments only, it will take Marcus over 6 years to pay off that debt, and he'll pay approximately $8,500 in interest alone. The credit card will cost him nearly $20,000 total for an $11,000 purchase. Think about that for a second. But Marcus has $20,000. His monthly expenses are about $3,800, so he needs roughly $15,200 for a 4-month emergency fund. That leaves him with $4,800 of surplus savings above his buffer. If Marcus applies that $4,800 directly to the credit card balance today, and then redirects his savings contribution of $400 per month toward the remaining $6,200 balance, he can eliminate that debt in about 16 months instead of 6 years, and save roughly $6,800 in interest payments. That $6,800 doesn't disappear. It becomes investable. At 8% over 30 years, that's another $68,000 in his retirement account from one decision made at the $20,000 milestone. This is what I mean when I say the math is brutal. Not brutal in a punishing way, brutal in a clarifying way. The numbers don't care about your feelings. They just show you exactly what your decisions are actually worth. And once you've dealt with Zone 1 debt, once the high interest stuff is gone and your emergency fund is intact, you're ready for the final piece. The one that most people at the $20,000 milestone haven't thought about yet. And it might be the most important. I want to end the main content of this video with something that doesn't involve a single spreadsheet, because I think it might actually be the most important thing I say today. There is a version of you that existed before you had $20,000 saved, and there is a version of you that exists after. And they are not the same person, not because the money changed you, but because the proof changed you. Here's what I mean. Research in behavioral psychology, including work by Dr. Brett Clance, one of the leading financial therapists in the country, consistently shows that our financial behaviors are largely driven by what he calls money scripts. These are subconscious beliefs about money that we developed in childhood and early adulthood, largely from watching the people around us. And for a significant portion of people, particularly people who grew up in households where money was tight, where financial stress was a background noise that never fully went away, the dominant money script is something like, people like me don't build wealth, people like me survive. And here's the brutal truth about that script: it's self-fulfilling. When you believe that wealth isn't really available to you, you make subconscious decisions that confirm that belief. You don't negotiate your salary aggressively because I'm lucky to have this job. You don't invest because I don't really understand all that stuff and it seems risky. You spend the surplus because something bad is probably coming anyway, so I might as well enjoy it now. 2000 breaks that script. Not automatically, not magically, but it provides evidence that contradicts it. You did a thing that the subconscious believes that people like you don't do, and evidence accumulated over time is the only thing that actually rewrites money scripts. I call this the identity audit, and I'd encourage you to literally do it. Actually write it down. Not just think about it, what you believed about money and wealth when you had $0 saved. What did you think was possible? What did you assume about your own financial future? And then write down what you believe now. At $20,000, I'd be willing to bet the answers are meaningfully different. Because here's what I've noticed talking to people who've crossed this threshold. The vocabulary changes. Before $20,000, people say things like, I am trying to save money. After $20,000, they say things like, I'm building my emergency fund, or I'm investing. It sounds subtle. It's not. Trying to save is an activity. Building wealth is an identity. And identity, the story you tell yourself about who you are financially, drives behavior more reliably than any spreadsheet or budget or financial plan ever will. Because plans require ongoing willpower to execute. Identity just requires you to act like yourself. Now, I want to be real with you for a second, because I don't want to oversell this. 2000 is not the end. It's not even close to the end. There are going to be moments after this milestone that feel just as hard as the moments before it. There will be setbacks. There will be months where the market drops and your $20,000 becomes $17,000 and your stomach drops with it. There will be unexpected expenses that test your emergency fund in real time. There will be moments where you question whether any of this is worth it. And in those moments, I want you to remember one thing. You've already proven that you can do something most people never do. Most Americans, the majority, cannot cover a $1,000 emergency from savings. You have 20 times that. Not because you got lucky, because you made decisions, consistently, over time, that most people didn't make. That's not a small thing. Don't let anyone, including yourself, tell you it is. Okay, let's pull this all together. Because we covered a lot of ground today, and I want to make sure you leave with a clear picture, not just a collection of interesting ideas, but an actual framework you can use. So let's recap. We started by establishing what $20,000 actually buys you that isn't money. And the answer is the toxic job shield, the freedom, the leverage, the psychological safety that comes from having 4 to 6 months of expenses in liquid savings. This isn't a soft benefit. Research consistently shows it translates into higher lifetime earnings through better negotiation, smarter career risk-taking, and the simple ability to say no to situations that don't serve you. The $20,000 is doing work you'll never see on a bank statement. Then we moved into the quiet multiplier, the compounding inflection point that makes $20,000 behave differently than $5,000. We ran the numbers. Person starting with $5,000 at 8% returns ends up with roughly $50,000 over 30 years. Person B starting with $20,000 ends up with over $200,000. The starting difference was $15,000. The outcome difference was $150,000. That is compounding, operating with enough fuel to actually show you what it can do. And the key insight: every dollar of investable surplus above your emergency buffer, invested now, carries a price tag you'll feel 30 years from now. Then we talked about the opportunity cost flip, the moment your money starts pulling more of its own weight. We established that $20,000 isn't where the flip happens, but it's where the flip first becomes visible on the horizon. And we talked about the dark side lifestyle inflation, which is the single most common way people stall out at this milestone. The rule: the month you hit $20,000, raise your automatic savings contribution immediately. Don't negotiate with the comfort zone. Keep moving. Then we got into the debt calculus, the 3 zones of debt, and how $20,000 in savings changes which zone you're actually in. The critical insight: you now have the security to aggressively attack high-interest debt without the risk of immediately reaccumulating it. Marcus's story showed us what that looks like in practice: a single decision at the $20,000 milestone that was worth over $68,000 in long-term wealth. The math is almost unfair. And finally, we talked about the identity shift, because the most important thing $20,000 does isn't mathematical. It's evidential. It proves to the part of your brain that's been running an old money script that the script is wrong. People like you do build wealth. Here's the proof. $20,000 in savings is the first piece of evidence in what I hope becomes a very long case. Now here's the one thing I want you to actually do after watching this video. Not 10 things. One thing. Look at your current savings and investment picture and identify which of the 5 concepts we discussed today applies most urgently to you right now. Is it the toxic job shield you need to shore up your liquid buffer? Is it the quiet multiplier you have surplus above your buffer that should be invested? Is it the debt calculus you have zone 1 debt that the math is screaming at you to eliminate? Figure out which one. Write it down. And do one concrete thing about it this week. Not someday. This week. Because here's the thing about $20,000 and really about every financial milestone. The milestone itself isn't the point. The point is what you do at the milestone. Most people cross it and keep walking without stopping to understand what changed. You just stopped. You just looked at the map. That already puts you ahead of most people. All right. I want to ask you something directly before we close out. Where are you right now? Seriously, I'm curious. Are you watching this at $5,000 in savings, trying to get to $20,000 and wondering if it's actually going to feel different when you get there? Are you sitting right at $20,000, which is why you clicked on this video? Or are you past $20,000, watching this because you want to understand what you've already built? Let me know in the comments. Tell me your number. You don't have to be specific if you don't want to be. Just a rough milestone, and tell me which of the 5 concepts hit hardest for you today. The toxic job shield, the quiet multiplier, the opportunity cost flip, the debt calculus, or the identity shift. I read every comment. Not in a creator says they read comments way. I actually read them. Because the questions and stories in the comments section are genuinely how I decide what to make next. If there's a scenario I didn't cover today, a specific debt situation, an income level, a life stage, tell me. That might be the next video. If this video gave you something useful, a number you didn't know, a framework you hadn't thought about, a way of looking at your financial situation that made something click, I'd ask you to do 2 things. Share this with one person who's in the thick of the $20,000 climb. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a pretty good time. I put out videos every week on real wealth building math for real people. No hustle culture nonsense. No skip the latte advice. Just the actual numbers explained honestly. I want to leave you with one final thought. We opened this video with a person sitting at their desk, looking at their savings account, feeling vaguely confused about why $20,000 didn't feel as monumental as they expected. Here's what I hope you understand now that you didn't understand 60 minutes ago. It didn't feel monumental because the monument isn't visible yet. The real value of $20,000 isn't in the account balance you can see today. It's in the negotiating leverage you use at your next salary review. It's in the compounding that's silently running in the background of every single day for the next 30 years. It's in the high interest debt you're now positioned to eliminate strategically instead of desperately. It's in the money script you just rewrote. The monument is being built right now. You just can't see it yet. And that honestly is how all the best things in finance work. Quietly, consistently, and almost always right on schedule. I'll see you in the next one.